folks, my name is Swagmaster, and today I will be reading you all a classic children's novel that's had multiple movie adaptations throughout the years. The story I'm talking about, of course, is Pinocchio, made by Carlo Collodi in 1883. So without further ado, let's begin the story. Chapter 1. How it came to pass that Master Cherry the carpenter found a piece of wood that laughed and cried like a child. There was once upon a time a king, my little readers will instantly exclaim. No, children, you are wrong. There was once upon a time a piece of wood. This wood was not valuable, it was only a common log like those that are burned in winter in the stoves and fireplaces to make a cheerful blaze and warm the rooms. I cannot say how it came about, but the fact is that one fine day this piece of wood was lying in the shop of an old carpenter of the name of Master Antonio. He was, however, called by everybody Master Cherry, in account of the end of his nose, which was always as red and polished as a ripe cherry. No sooner had Master Cherry set eyes on the piece of wood than his face beamed with delight, and, rubbing his hands together with satisfaction, he said softly to himself, "This wood has come at the right moment, it will just do to make the leg of a little table." Having said this, he immediately took a sharp axe with which to remove the bark and the rough surface. Just, however, as he was going to give the first stroke, he remained with his arms suspended in the air, for he heard a very small voice saying imploringly,
"Do not strike me so hard."
Picture to yourselves the astonishment of good old Master Cherry. He turned his terrified eyes all round the room to try and discover where the little voice could possibly have come from, but he saw nobody. He looked under the bench. Nobody. He looked into a cupboard that was always shut. Nobody. He looked into a basket of shavings and sawdust. Nobody. He even opened the door of the shop and gave a glance into the street, and still nobody. Who, then, could it be? "I see how it is," he said, laughing and scratching his wig. "Evidently that little voice was all my imagination. Let us set to work again." And taking up the axe, he struck a tremendous blow in the piece of wood.
"Oh, oh, you have hurt me,"
cried the same little voice dolefully. This time Master Cherry was petrified. His eyes started out of his head with fright, his mouth remained open, and his tongue hung out almost to the end of his chin, like a mask in a fountain. As soon as he had recovered the use of his speech, he began to say, stuttering and trembling with fear, "But where in earth can that little voice have come from that said, 'Oh, here there is certainly not a living soul'? Is it possible that this piece of wood can have learned to cry and to lament like a child? I cannot believe it. This piece of wood, here it is, a log for fuel like all the others, and thrown on the fire it would about suffice to boil a saucepan of beans. How then? If anyone is hidden inside, so much the worse for him. I will settle him at once." So saying, he seized the poor piece of wood and commenced beating it without mercy against the walls of the room. Then he stopped to listen, if he could hear any little voice lamenting. He waited 2 minutes, nothing. 5 minutes, nothing. 10 minutes, still nothing. "I see how it is," he then said, forcing himself to laugh and pushing up his wig. "Evidently the little voice that said, 'Oh, oh,' was all my imagination. Let us set to work again." But as all the same he was in a great fright, he tried to sing to give himself a little courage. Putting the axe aside, he took his plane to plane and polished a bit of wood, but whilst he was running it up and down he heard the same little voice say, laughing,
"Have done. You are tickling me all over."
This time poor Master Cherry fell down, as if he had been struck by lightning. When he at last opened his eyes he found himself seated in the floor. His face was quite changed, even the end of his nose, instead of being crimson, as it was nearly always, had become blue from fright. Chapter 2. Master Cherry makes a present of the piece of wood to his friend Geppetto, who makes it to make for himself a wonderful puppet that shall know how to dance, and to fence, and to leap like an acrobat. At that moment someone knocked at the door. "Come in," said the carpenter, without having the strength to rise to his feet. A lively little old man immediately walked into the shop. His name was Geppetto, but when the boys of the neighborhood wished to put him in a passion they called him by the nickname of Polendina, because his yellow wig resembled a pudding made of Indian corn. Geppetto was very fiery. Woe to him who called him Polendina. He became furious, and there was no holding him.
Good day, Master Antonio,
said Geppetto.
What are you doing there on the floor?
I am teaching the alphabet to the ants. Much good may that do you. What has brought you to me, neighbor Geppetto?
My legs. But to say the truth, Master Antonio, I am come to ask a favor of you.
Here I am, ready to serve you, replied the carpenter, getting onto his knees.
This morning an idea came into my head.
Let us hear it.
I thought I would make a beautiful wooden pulpit, but a wonderful pulpit that should know how to dance, to fence, and to leap like an acrobat. With this pulpit I would travel about the world to earn a piece of bread and a glass of wine. What do you think of it?
Bravo, Polendina,
exclaimed the same little voice, and it was impossible to say where it came from. Hearing himself called Polendina, Geppetto became as red as a turkey cock from rage, and turning to the carpenter he said in a fury,
Why do you insult me?
Who insults you?
You called me Polendina.
It was not I.
Would you have it, then, that it was I? It was you, I say.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
And becoming more and more angry, from words they came to blows, and flying at each other they bit, and fought, and scratched manfully. When the fight was over, Master Antonio was in possession of Geppetto's yellow wig, and Geppetto discovered that the gray wig belonging to the carpenter had remained between his teeth. Give me back my wig, screamed Master Antonio.
And you, return me mine, and let us make friends.
The two old men, having each recovered his own wig, shook hands, and swore that they would remain friends to the end of their lives. Well then, neighbor Geppetto, said the carpenter, to prove that peace was made, what is the favor that you wish of me?
I want a little wood to make my pulpit. Will you give me some?
Master Antonio was delighted, and he immediately went to the bench and fetched the piece of wood that had caused him so much fear. But just as he was going to give it to his friend, the piece of wood gave a shake, and wriggling violently out of his hand struck with all its force against the dried up shins of poor Geppetto. Ah! Is that the courteous way in which